Oh, the 90s. Things were so simple back then, at least for my generation. There was the Game Boy, Batman the Animated Series, the Age of the Apocalypse storyline from the Marvel comics at the time. These things were the highlight of my day, especially if I was doing it with a friend. I wasn't really into computers then. My family had dial-up, plus a shitty Windows 98 computer that made everything so frustrating. No, my furthest exploration into the digital realm was through my Nintendo 64. Super Smash Bros. 64, Super Mario 64, Star Fox 64, Mario Kart 64, and of course Pokemon Snap were my favourites. And after I'd rooted out every single secret in those games, the only one that kept my attention was Pokemon Snap. I'd go through every single level multiple times trying to get the best shot of every Pokemon featured in the game. What intrigued me was the realism of the game. In most other Pokemon games, they're either in a ball or walking alongside you, feeling synthetic, and you couldn't walk amongst them and saw how they interacted. You could argue myuu Pikachu was more interactive, but that only recognised certain words and phrases, alongside the constant scripted events that gave the game a sickeningly synthetic feel. The first-person 3D view of Pokemon Snap gave everyone in the 90s something only they could dream of, and see a realistic Pokemon world. So eventually we moved, got a PS2, DS Lite, and a computer that could run Half-Life. I'd moved on to bigger and better things, but often look back fondly at the simplicity of my childhood. And my Nintendo 64 and all its games were put away in a dusty box in the corner of my basement. So this brings my story to more recent events. A few days ago I was at my friend's house. He had practically everything: Wi-Fi, PS3, a widescreen TV, drum kit, piano, surround sound, guitars and whatnot. He was one of the guys I used to whoop in Super Smash Bros. Back in the day. Anyway, we were hanging out and he wanted to show me something. He put it up his Wii and navigated through the channels, and among them was Pokemon Snap, which he proceeded to load. He'd explained that he'd recently downloaded it from the Virtual Console. After hearing the fast-paced intro and the camera flashes, I was overcome by a wave of nostalgia, which was something I don't feel often nowadays. And at this point, I really wanted to play the game. My friend loaded up the game and pressed continue. For anyone unfamiliar with Pokemon Snap, the basic plot is that Professor Oak tasks the player with taking pictures of Pokemon on some random island, with the island containing many different environments. And as you take more pictures and gain more points, more areas and tools become available, like an apple which serves as bait, the Pestiball which angers Pokemon, and the Pokeflute which wakes sleeping Pokemon. Alongside that, the player takes control of a character named Todd who originated from the anime, who rides in a buggy on a set track, with the buggy moving at a set speed, in which you must take pictures from. And there's 36 out of the 150 Pokemon in the game. And as for levels, or courses as Oak calls them, they range from a beach to a volcano, a river and caves, with the island being a very diverse place. But even with my extensive playing, the darkest parts had eluded me, until recently. So Oak said welcome in his usual creepy sounding pre-recorded voice line, and I always found it funny that the game only had a few word sentences of pre-recorded words per 2 or 3 sentences shown in the text boxes. Reliving our childhoods, we took turns playing and seeing who could get the best high scores, but soon enough I had to go home, but I really didn't want to stop playing Pokemon Snap. When I got home, I went to my basement and dug up my old N64, alongside the musty old cardboard box containing the cartridges, old controllers, rumble packs, and SD cards. I hooked up the console to my TV in my room, popped in Pokemon Snap, and shifted the Pokeball into position. A little more backstory here. When I originally got my N64, the myuu Pikachu model was on sale for an insane deal at my Toys R Us, and my mother decided to get it, since it came with the game. And when you turn the Pokeball switch on, his cheeks light up, and his foot acts as the reset switch. Anyway, when I turned the console on, the screen remained static, so I pulled out the cartridge to check the chip. Sure enough, it was covered in a black gunk. I spent almost half an hour trying to get that nasty gunk off the cartridge, and it was at this point I noticed something strange. Once I'd removed the substance, I noticed the chip was coloured red, like it had stained, and there were small rectangles on the surface, which I assumed were the contacts. None of my other games had the substance, and their chips were green with the gold contacts. And there were other oddities with this particular cartridge. There was no Nintendo seal of approval sticker anywhere on the cartridge. Usually they're all on all N64 cartridges and other Nintendo products from this era. And alongside this, there was no label on the back warning about not playing the game if you suffer from seizures, and the front label was slightly off-center. These things were red flags, but I'm a lax kind of guy, and I take things in stride, so I didn't really care much. At this point, I thought the goo had damaged the cartridge from the discoloration, but I put it back in for the hell of it, and to my surprise, the Nintendo logo popped up on my TV. So the loading screen appeared, and alongside the usual upbeat title screen and camera flashes, everything seemed the same, just as how it was back at my friend's house. However, it was only then that I noticed there was a few visual distortions that I assumed was because of the cartridge damage. There was a few purple lines that went from the top to the bottom of the screen and were only a few inches wide, with one on each edge and one down the middle. They were slightly darker more further in on the screen, but you could still see through them somewhat. It was only a small inconvenience, and I didn't really mind all that much. I pressed the start button, and to my surprise, there was no save option. The cartridge's battery must have died, and as a result the save data must have been wiped. All those hours of hard work and completion, now gone. Oh well, I probably would have started a new file anyway. I started a new game, and it was then that more strange things started to occur. I was in Oak's lab, but his features were changed. His eyes were black, and they had no pupils, and he had a stern, almost angry look on his face. And that, alongside the purple distortion that ran along his left half, made him look disturbing looking. All the text in the text boxes were normal, but all the pre-recorded lines that I mentioned earlier were distorted. The audio sounded slow and distorted, and it reminded me of the low-pitched voices heard in early arcade games like Doom, for example. But besides these few things, I just attributed it to cartridge damage, and the gameplay was normal, or so I thought. Things seemed to get more and more disturbing. However, I was a man of science, and I didn't believe in things like ghosts, and prided myself on overcoming things that people most feared. I went to the first course, which was the beach, and there was more visual distortions there. All the Pokemon had no pupils, and their eyes were pure black. And alongside that, underneath the sprites of the Pokemon was a purple-like ring, and it appeared even under the flying Pidgeys as they passed. And another distortion here was the cloud was a weird light green, and there was no clouds or sun in the sky. The movement of the Pokemon was unnatural and cold, like they were afraid of something. I went through the course, taking pictures of the Pokemon. However, I noticed that each of the ones that I took photos of disappeared shortly after I'd taken the photos. Feeling concerned about this, I decided not to take pictures of Pokemon that would only matter later in the game, like Snorlax and Chansey. Before I entered the exit gate, I turned around and saw what appeared to be a circle that indicated that Pokemon was following me. But there was no sprite, and I took a picture, but I was instantly taken back to the lab. I selected all the pictures for the Pokemon report, but strangely enough, the last photo wasn't there. The rating process went as normal, but at the end, Oak said, "Good job harvesting." There was a brief pause, and then he said, "You let it in, didn't you? Well, you know what that means. Go to the tunnel." I assumed he meant the tunnel course, so I went to the map and saw that it was now available. And as I entered the course, I noticed that I now had all the tools. I went through the course, the distortion still being present like in the earlier course, but once I got to the end section and threw an apple at the electrode to open up the route to the volcano, It looked like it was in extreme agony, not the comical explosion seen before, and its face was an expression as if it was begging for help. As the travel cutscene played, I noticed the same dark sprite from before following me, and strangely there was no cut back to the lab, and instead it took me straight to the volcano level. A quick survey of the area showed the visual distortions getting worse, and as I moved forward, Ponytails and Rapidash were running and jumping into the lava, making low-pitched cries as they burn. All the Pokemon did this until I approached the egg. You're supposed to hit it with an apple to proceed, but I found my tools were gone. I saw the purple ring again. It was in place motionless behind me, and I saw something approaching. It was the electrode from the cave, and its eyes had a look of anger. I couldn't do anything at this point, and as soon as it hit me, it exploded and caused the buggy to fall top down into the lava. A travel cutscene played, but it was slow and distorted as the wailing cries of the burning Todd were heard in the background. Suddenly I was back in the lab, and Oak looked even more angry than before, as he said, "You let it get to you, didn't you? Well, you only have yourself to blame." The screen faded to black, and the course selection screen came up with Oak standing alone, and the only option was Hell, which was spelt with 3 L's. The go back option was gone, so I had no choice but to click on it. The camera zoomed in on the charred corpse of Todd, the bottom half covered by the underside of the buggy. Everything was ultra realistic and on a pedestal of stone in a sea of lava. With all the Pokemon I'd taken photos of and made disappear were floating in the lava, screaming with in low-pitched voices. Suddenly there was a camera flash and the screen flung around to a demonic figure taking pictures of the corpses. After he took some photos, he stomped on Todd's head and took more. Then a low-pitched voice said, "Say cheese," which came out of my speakers, and my whole room lit up for a second before quickly turning itself off, the screen turning to black. I hit reset because I knew it was a game and it couldn't hurt me. Sure, that stuff was sick, but I'd seen worse on the internet, and I wanted to see what happened. The menu then appeared, with the only option being to view the photo album. I hit A and immediately wished I hadn't. The album was filled with graphic images of gore and violence, the photos not being in 64-bit, but rather authentic scanned photos. At this point I was shaken and felt nauseous, but it got worse. The game force scrolled to the final picture, which was the picture of the purple ring without a sprite, only now it showed a picture of my dead body floating a foot from the ground, with the camera jammed into my head, and after it faded to black. I was so scared, I broke the cartridge in 2, and ditched it in 2 separate bins. A few days later I asked my mother if she'd done anything with the copy of Pokemon Snap. "Oh yes," she said. When we moved here I was carrying the box. The game fell out and it broke, and when I went to pick it up, I found it had fallen into the crack in the crawl space and I couldn't find it. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but I thought you'd outgrown it anyway." A look of shock must have fallen over my face as my mother asked what was wrong. "It's nothing," I said. "I'm fine." I decided not to tell her. A week had passed and I wanted to share the story to the internet, to explain my experience, or to entertain some, I suppose. I apologise for the length, but I feel the details are necessary. What scares me the most isn't the images of gore or my dead body, but what scares me is whatever is in my basement that can turn a broken game into something so gruesome.